Let's talk about using commas and appositive. Okay, as you know about appositive is a noun or a noun phrase that is used like an adjective to clarify the identify of another noun in a sentences. Um, an appositive is a noun or noun phrase that is used like an adjective to clarify the identify of another noun is a sentence in a sentences. So when the appositive is non-essential, which means that the sentences will make sense without it, then the appositive must be surrounded by commas. Okay, so basically I read like the main idea. You can just as you hear this, you can just hear it from one ear and then it just flow out of the other ear. It is okay because the best way to practice this, to understand this concept, is to practice and is to read an example, and you will soon realize. An appositive is a noun or pronoun, so it is usually accompanied by a modifier placed near another noun to describe, explain, or identify that noun. In a friendlier terms, it's a group of words that we use as writer to clarify further the identify of a particular noun. Also, a common place is where we use appositive in an introductory paragraph is in the introductory paragraph of an essay, because we're using a person name for the first time, and it is our job to introduce this stranger to our audience using appositive. For example, Dr. Roger Billing, comma, a world-renowned scientist and pioneer of hydrogen engineer, comma, explained his plan for his world free of the fossil fuel independence in his book, The Hydrogen Worldview. So, if this were in our introductory paragraph, when our audience would not yet know who Dr. Roger Billing are, who Roger Billing is in the context of the essay. So we use an appositive to describe him and ensure that his presence makes sense in our essay. But of course, if we don't have this, extra information telling about Dr. Roger Billing, the sentences will still make sense. Like Dr. Roger Billing explained his plan for a world free from fossil fuel dependence in his book. It still makes sense. But of course, adding extra information means adding extra comma. You need to have a comma in front of this extra information, and when we end at the and a comma at the last word of this extra information. Remember, beyond just trying to understand what a positive is, but we are also trying to understand when we do and when we do not need to use comma to set off a positive in a sentences. The single rule is that governs the use of comma is whether or not the noun or noun phrase is essential to the meaning of sentences. So if we have a positive in a sentences, but of course it is an essential information. If we don't have that, and then it doesn't make sense. So we don't add comma to the sentences where a positive was used and it makes sense. Now, so when to use commas? Well, helpful phrases that we can use to remember whether or not to surround a positive with a comma is extra information mean extra commas. And the idea is that information extra help us remember if we need extra commas too. So if we could just take out the positive and in sentences, it would still make sense, and you need commas. For example, all students who have to pay their library fines will be able to register for class. Notice these sentences do not have any commas, while the noun phrase here, who have not paid their library fine, is students. It is essential because if it stand alone here, all students will not be able to register for class. Well, not all student, right? But it have to be all student who have not paid their library fines. So who have not paid their library fine is an appositive, but it is essential in the sentences. If we do not clarify which student will not be able to register for classes, then all student would not be able to register, which would result in an empty classroom, and that doesn't make sense at all. Since this phrase is essential and not extra, it does not get set off from the rest of the sentences with a comma. So if we are saying that a noun phrase is not essential, it means that we can read the rest of the sentences without those words, and then the sentences will still make sense. But another way of thinking about this is by applying a thumb test. If we can take a thumb, cover up the positive, and still read a complete sentence, and then the positive is non-essential, and we need to surround it with the commas at the start and end of the positive, like so. I'm learning a lot from Todd Edmond, my social studies teachers. Okay, this sentences we can cover up the phrase my social studies teacher with a thumb, and the sentences will still make sense. Therefore, we set off the positive with a comma. But if we cover my social studies teacher with a thumb and then we read the sentences but it do not make sense, then we don't need comma for this information. We can also reverse it if we're unsure about it. And another test we can use to see if we're using comma with an appositive correctly is to put in the comma where we think they belong, and then to see if the sentences could be read with a portion inside the commas. If the meaning of the sentences no longer makes sense without the phrase in commas, then we need to take the comma back out because the phrase is essential to the rest of the sentences. A bad example would be, the boy dribbling the ball is my son. Okay, if you try reading those sentences without the appositive and read, the boy is my son. This doesn't work because my son could be any of the boys. So we don't know who the boy is. It have to be somebody doing what action, But of course, we can improve that by, putting away the commas and say the boy dribbling the ball is my son. Since the appositive is essential and not extra information, we need to write the phrase without extra commas. And now it makes sense.